Just like a book or a movie is composed of a long series of scenes, a session of Dungeons & Dragons is composed, in essence, of a long series of encounters. But even though the encounter is the most important ingredient for creating fun and memorable sessions for your players, we often end up with encounters that are boring, bland, and meaningless. So what I want to do in this video is show you how you can create more exciting, fun, and memorable encounters by just putting a little thought into how you design them. We'll be using some examples from Rime of the Frostmaiden, an official published adventure, but don't worry, I'll try to keep it mostly spoiler-free, so if you haven't played that yet or isn't intent on running it, you can still follow along. Alright, so without further ado, let's take a look at how we can create more fun, memorable, and exciting encounters for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games. For those of you who aren't familiar with the channel, my name's Jay Valeur. I'm with Eventyr Games, and I've created content for a lot of published adventure modules, including a series of best-selling DM's resources for the official adventures. That means that I've played through and read most of the official campaigns for 5th edition, as well as other published adventures and, of course, homebrew campaigns. And if there's one thing I can't stand, it's boring and meaningless encounters. I believe that there's really only one universal rule to all tabletop role-playing games, and that rule is have fun. The game is about having fun. All games are about having fun. And if we're having to sit through a long and meaningless encounter that will fill up an hour of our time and end up not doing anything, being incredibly boring, and simply just a waste of time, then that's against the rules. So that's why I decided to make this video, and of course because our patrons voted on it and decided that this was the video they wanted to see this week. If you want to have a say about what we make a video about next, you can check out patreon.com/eventyr. Links are in the description below. Alright, so before we can start making our encounters more exciting, let's first establish what an encounter is. When most people hear the word encounter, they think of a combat encounter, but I use the term a bit more loosely than that. To me, an encounter is any situation where the characters interact meaningfully with the world. So that could be talking with the shopkeeper, crossing a dangerous ravine, or of course the regular combat encounter. Now, even though encounters encompass a lot more than just combat encounters are usually the most important encounters we have, simply by virtue of them being usually the longest encounters. So if you have a boring combat encounter, you'll really feel it because it's very long as well. So now that we know what an encounter is, I'll give 2 examples of what I consider to be boring or bad encounters. These 2 examples are from the adventure book Rime of the Frostmaiden, but don't worry, I'll keep it spoiler-free or mostly spoiler-free, so that even if you are intending to play in that campaign one day, you shouldn't be spoiled by following along with this video. The first encounter features a group of dwarves that is traveling across the same area as the characters. There's a description of the dwarves. We know that they're indifferent toward the party, but they may become friendly if they're spoken to in Dwarvish, and that's it. So most likely the characters will run into these dwarves, exchange some pleasantries about the weather, and move on. Not very interesting. The other encounter is a pack of crack cats. These are basically beefed up wolves that will ambush and attack the party and flee if a few of them are defeated. There's no reward or treasure to this encounter, and unless the characters are very low level, these crack cats are unlikely to be a real threat, which means that the characters can simply rest off afterward, gaining back whatever hit points and other resources they spent defeating the crack cats. So though these are very different encounters, they share the same flaw. They are pointless. There's no real information that can be learned from the encounters. There's no lasting consequences to anything that happens during the encounter, and the encounters aren't really very entertaining while they're going on either. So in the end, why even run these encounters? And that'll be my first tip for running better encounters. If you can't make it good, make it short. You don't always have the time to beef up an encounter, make it more exciting, do all this stuff that I'm going to recommend in a minute. Sometimes you roll a random encounter, you want to have a random encounter, but you don't know what to do with it, and you know it's going to be boring. Or sometimes the characters decide that they want to go shopping for potions of healing, and you're scrambling to figure out something that'll be entertaining and worthwhile, a merchant you can come up with, and you're drawing blanks. In those cases, just make it short. If the characters encounter crack cats, you can run the fastest combat encounter you know how to, or you can just say you encounter some crack cats, they got a few bites in here there, but you ended up defeating them, it was very easy, and you moved on. Or you ran into a shopkeeper that sold potions, give me a persuasion check, yeah, you bargained him down to 40 gold pieces and you got your potions. That's it. Does this mean that every encounter should be handled this way? No, of course not. That would be extremely boring, just paraphrasing the adventure to the characters. but if you know that something isn't going to be exciting or worthwhile or worth running, simply making it short makes it so that even though it's still boring, at least it doesn't take up valuable time that can be used for stuff that is actually exciting. For the situations where you do have some time to prepare your encounters, or at least think about how you can make them more entertaining and worthwhile, what I usually do is that I'll add I.C.E. I.C.E. stands for information, consequences, and entertainment, and are the three ingredients that I think an encounter needs to be really, really great. Now, an encounter doesn't need to have all three of these components to be great. You can make a fine or worthwhile or even good encounter just adding one or two of them to the encounter. So what I'll do now is that I'll briefly go over what I mean by information, consequences, and entertainment, as well as how you can add these three components to the two examples that we've just discussed. To have an encounter provide information is one way to make it more meaningful. Whether that's information about the world or the adventure story, the character's immediate environment or situation, or even the characters themselves, just having this information makes sure that the encounter wasn't a complete waste of time. This could be an NPC explaining that the tiefling is a descendant of Asmodeus, or that the dragon the characters are about to face is extremely afraid of water. It could also be passing through a destroyed village that underscores how evil and powerful the villain is, or perhaps a letter for hire penned by the bard's arch-enemy found in the pocket of an assassin the characters have just defeated. Whichever the information it is, the most important thing is that it is either interesting and or useful to the party. In the encounter with the dwarves, we can add in this information by having them point out that there's a blizzard coming, or perhaps even supply a quest hook about a dragon's treasure being hidden somewhere around here, or maybe they've seen some weird characters around some ruins nearby. They can also just help the characters going to where they're going next, so give directions to that place, or maybe warn them about some dangers coming up. As a concrete example, let's say that the dwarves know that there's an ice troll loitering about the area where the characters are going, and that they also know the ice troll's weaknesses and strengths and how best to fight it. Maybe they even know how you can use the ice troll's heart to create potions of cold resistance. As for the Crack Cat encounter, you can have them be embedded with some weird magical ice that has perhaps turned them evil and more aggressive than usual Crack Cats, really underscoring some of the other stuff that's going on in the adventure. Or you can have them be led by an awakened Crack Cat who's been awakened by an evil spellcaster who's hiding somewhere nearby, and maybe even have something out for the party who's actively trying to kill them or hinder them. If the Crack Cats are defeated, this awakened Crack Cat would yell, "I yield," and the characters could have a conversation with it, perhaps learning the name of the spellcaster who's awakened it, its plans, and maybe even where the spellcaster is holed up. Consequences can be both positive and negative. It can range from gaining new magical items, gold, or treasure, to saving innocent lives, or improving the character's reputation in town or with an NPC that they care about. Negative consequences is of course the opposite, so that'll be losing money, losing resources, losing hit points that you need before you can get them back, and perhaps costing innocent lives, failing to save someone, or losing reputation or standing in the town where you're at. Getting in trouble with the law is also a consequence, and so on. Consequences are usually most prevalent in combat encounters, and that'll often be by simply increasing the difficulty of the encounter, putting the character's life at stake, which is of course a big consequence, or by placing a combat encounter before the characters can rest up, so that one combat encounter has consequences for how the characters maybe fares in the next combat encounter. Luckily, there's other ways to introduce consequences to combat encounters beyond just making them more difficult or placing more of them at the same day. A rust monster that threatens the paladin's fancy plate mail, or the big treasure that is on the other side of a dragon, are also meaningful consequences. You can also put NPCs' lives at stake instead of the characters, so if the characters aren't quick enough, the Crack Cats will have killed the innocent people they're attacking, or the orcs will have slaughtered the village, and so on. For non-combat encounters, consequences come in many forms, whether that's the bard's performance in a singing contest deciding the character's reputation in town, or the conversation with the seer having an impact on how the characters will fare. Maybe they're getting a magical item, or they're getting a magical curse. Looking at our examples from before, we can add consequences to the encounter with the dwarves by maybe deciding that one of them has fallen into a ravine. The two other dwarves can't get into the ravine, so they're calling for aid, and if the characters are quick enough to help them, they'll both earn the dwarves' gratitude and improve reputation with the stout folk, as well as maybe a gemstone worth 100 gold pieces. As for the crack cat encounter, we can of course just increase the difficulty of the encounter by adding more crack cats or beefing them up a bit, or we can place the crack cat encounter just before the characters arrive at the destination they're going to, so that any hit points and resources they spend defeating the crack cats will actually be a meaningful consequence. We can also add in a reward, something that any character with a proficiency in Arcana or Nature will realize. Perhaps the crack cat's pills can be used to fashion magical items that can repel spells, and that is of course a very meaningful consequence because the characters can either sell the pills or use them to create their own magic items. Encounters will often become more entertaining simply by the fact that they have consequences or that provide interesting information. But encounters can also be intrinsically entertaining, so entertaining even if they don't have consequences and even if they can't provide any meaningful information or drive the story forward. Now, there's several ways we can make encounters more entertaining. It could be making a combat more dynamic and challenging. Perhaps there's difficult decisions the characters will need to make or tactics they will need to employ. It can also be by giving weird mannerisms and odd quirks to NPCs. It can also mean just replacing a locked door with a puzzle door instead, because opening a lock is rather boring, while figuring out a puzzle is of course a lot more entertaining. For the encounter with the dwarves, we can add in some entertainment by giving them some personality and some odd quirks and mannerisms. So let's say there's Dalrin Treebeard, who only speaks in grunts and growls. We have Branthel Stonebreaker, who's far too upbeat for other dwarves' liking and perhaps have a very unseemly infatuation with elves and other fae-like creatures. Lastly, there's Jarno Bluebeard, who's lost nearly all his fingers to frostbite and is constantly worried about everything being a danger, offering negative remarks such as, "I wouldn't do that, you'll probably die," and so on. We can also make it more entertaining by adding a little into the scenario where a dwarf has fallen to the bottom of a ravine. So that could be requiring a strength athletics check or acrobatics check to climb down, and if a character fails, a stone drops on the dwarf and sends them tumbling down this icy river underground, never to be seen again. If the characters do make it down, they can try to pull the dwarf up, but again, another failure on a, let's say, easy check will result in the dwarf being swept away and the characters having lost their chance to gain the dwarf's gratitude and maybe any rewards or information they could otherwise provide. So instead of just having an encounter with the dwarves that is a lot of talking, yapping back and forth, we put some action into it by putting some roles in there and making a little scenario the characters will have to complete, even if it's a scenario that will only take maybe a few minutes and not be too difficult or have any great consequences for the characters themselves. As for the crack cats, we can do this in several ways. One way is of course to go in and look at the crack cat stat block and maybe do something to improve them and make them more tactically challenging. It could also mean that we change the encounter a bit, so we play with the environment and maybe have the crack cats unleash an avalanche upon the characters before they ambush them, so the characters are divided and have to make some tactical choices about how to fight off the crack cats. So to summarize, we can make encounters more exciting by remembering the acronym I.C.E, information, consequences, and entertainment. If we have applied all these to the two examples from before, we end up with the following two encounters. The characters happen upon two dwarves who are frantically shouting down a narrow ravine. When she sees the party, Branthel Stonebreaker calls to them for aid, singling out the beautiful elf as probably the only one who can save Dalrin. Meanwhile, Jarno Bluebeard mumbles that it's probably too late to save Dalrin anyway, and that anyone who goes down there will die. By succeeding on a few athletics or acrobatics checks, a nimble character can get down and fish Dalrin out. If they fail, the dwarves are of course disappointed and the character's reputation suffers greatly and they learn no new information. If they succeed, Dalrin grunts in thanks and gives them a gemstone worth 100 gold pieces and also some information about the Outtro they're about to face, how they can best fight it, and perhaps even how they can use its heart to create potions of cold resistance. As for the crack cat encounter, the characters are ambushed by crack cats, led by an awakened crack cat, the crack cat's leader, which will give some extra abilities as well. The encounter starts as a small avalanche falls on the party, perhaps splitting them up and maybe even burying them in snow and ice. If the characters defeat the crack cats, the awakened crack cat yields and can tell the characters about the druid that awakened it and where the characters can find her. A character with proficiency in Arcana or Nature also realizes that the crack cat's pills are valuable and can be used to create magic items that can repel spells and other magical attacks. So I hope all of this makes sense. This is the way that I like to think about encounters when I'm either preparing my own encounters from the bottom up, or when I'm running an adventure such as Rime with a Frostmaiden, where I'm flipping through, looking at the encounters and judging whether or not I should run it, if I should sort of skip over it, maybe run it really quickly, or just thinking about how I can make encounters better so that the sessions become more entertaining for the players. Now I want to reiterate that every encounter doesn't have to be a unique experience with all of these different components added in. These are just some of the tools we can use to enhance our encounters. Even when you think about all these things and try to prepare your best and do your best to create the most fun and memorable encounters for the players, you won't always succeed. And when that's the case, just remember the rule: if you can't make it good, make it short. Skip over whatever content you can that isn't exciting for the players or you to run through, and stay focused on whatever is fun for you and your players. Because that is, in the end, what makes encounters great and what makes this game great. We're having fun, and that's all it's supposed to be. Alright, so that wraps up this video on making fun and memorable encounters. Don't worry, I'll get back to the Rime of the Frostmaiden series very shortly. I'll maybe also be looking into Candlekeep Mysteries, which I'm currently working on putting some stuff out for. If you want to support what we do here, you can check out the Patreon, and if you want to check out some of the other stuff we have made for Dungeons & Dragons, you can check out eventyrgames.com or thedmsguild.com. And of course, if you've made it this far, please like and subscribe. I keep forgetting to say these YouTube things. I probably should say them in the beginning of the video, I think, but yeah, if you're here, like and subscribe. I had a goal of 200 subscribers for March, and it seems like we'll get there, which is just amazing to me that so many people want to follow along with these videos and what we do here. So yeah, that's it for me. Have a good one, and I hope to see you in the next video.